The morning sun rose gently over the small American town, where Maddie's old auto repair garage sat on the edge of Main Street. It wasn't much to look at: rusted metal sheets, faded paint, and a squeaky garage door that got stuck half the time. But inside, it was Maddie's world. The 26-year-old mechanic wiped her hands on her overalls and leaned over the hood of an ancient pickup, the smell of oil and grease oddly comforting. She had inherited this place from her father, who taught her to listen to the sound of engines like they were telling secrets. As she tightened the last bolt under the hood, Maddie heard the crunch of old tires outside. She stepped into the sunlight, squinting as a battered minivan pulled up by the curb. Its paint was chipped, the bumper dented, and the rear window was taped with plastic. Out stepped a woman in her late 30s, exhaustion lining her face, and Maddie could see the shape of a young girl peering out the back window. Maddie tossed her wrench onto the workbench, wiping her hands one more time before walking over. "Morning, ma'am. Trouble with the van?" Maddie asked, trying to sound casual. The woman gave a tired smile and pushed her hair back. "Maybe later. And right now I was hoping you'd look at something else." Maddie raised an eyebrow, confused, until the woman slid the side door open. There, in the dim interior, sat a girl of maybe 10 or 11, her legs thin and braced with metal supports, a worn-out wheelchair folded beside her. The little girl, whose name turned out to be Lucy, gave Maddie a shy wave. Maddie's heart tightened a bit. She'd seen hard luck before, but this hit differently. Lucy's mom, Angela, explained that the doctors had done all they could: surgeries, braces, therapies, but the wheelchair they could afford was falling apart. Lucy hated it, not because she hated being different, but because every rattle and wobble reminded her she was stuck in it. Maddie asked if she could take a closer look. She squatted down by the van's open door, inspecting the wheelchair. It was an old model, the kind donated by charities or found second-hand at yard sales. One wheel was bent inward, the brakes didn't hold right, and the seat cushion was barely a cushion anymore. Maddie's mind raced, cataloguing fixes before she even realized she was doing it. Angela bit her lip, voice low. "I don't have much, but if you could patch it up just enough to get her through the summer." Maddie didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at Lucy. The girl's eyes were bright but guarded, as if she'd learned not to get her hopes up. Maddie couldn't stand that look. She gave Lucy a grin instead. "Hey, think you can help me out? I'll need an assistant." Lucy's face broke into a grin of her own, small but genuine. Maddie helped her out of the van and carefully unfolded the wheelchair, guiding the girl onto it with gentle hands. Angela hovered close, but Maddie caught her eye and nodded. She had this. Together, they wheeled Lucy inside the garage, the smell of old engines and fresh oil surrounding them. To Lucy, it probably felt like a spaceship hangar. To Maddie, it felt like a promise waiting to be kept. Inside, Maddie wheeled Lucy up to her workbench, clearing space between an old carburetor and a box of rusted spark plugs. She asked Lucy what she wanted her chair to do, if it could do anything at all. The girl's answer was simple. "I just don't want it to squeak so loud, and I wish it wouldn't wobble when I roll fast." Maddie chuckled. "Roll fast, huh? I can work with that." Angela sat quietly in a corner, grateful but skeptical. She knew all too well that charity often came with conditions, or pity, but Maddie offered neither. She offered ideas. She rummaged through shelves piled with scrap metal, spare bike parts, and leftover gears from old lawnmowers. She saw possibilities in every forgotten part, things she'd once saved because her dad had taught her that nothing is junk if you know how to use it. Lucy watched Maddie work, eyes wide as she laid out tools like a magician preparing a trick. Maddie talked her through every step, showing her how to check a wheel's alignment, how to tighten the axle bolt so it wouldn't drag to one side. Lucy's fingers were too small for most tools, but she liked handing Maddie wrenches, feeling important every time Maddie said, "Good catch, boss." Hours slipped by like minutes. Neighbors dropped by, peeking in to see what the mechanic girl was up to now. When they saw Lucy in the wheelchair with her big grin, handing Maddie pliers or laughing when a bolt dropped and rolled under the lift, they left with quiet smiles and full hearts. Maddie knew they'd be talking about this all week. By late afternoon, Maddie had the wheelchair flipped over on a wooden table, its wheels off, the frame propped up by an old milk crate. She polished the axles, replaced the bearings with parts she'd salvaged from a BMX bike, and even found an old mountain bike shock absorber that she thought she could adapt. Lucy asked question after question, soaking up every answer like sunlight. Angela brought Maddie a cup of stale diner coffee, too grateful to speak. She hadn't asked how much this would cost, mostly because she knew she couldn't afford it if Maddie asked for more than a handshake. But Maddie didn't mention money once. She only asked for Lucy's patience and trust, and both were given freely. As dusk settled, Maddie wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her arm and studied her work. The wheelchair still looked like the same battered frame, but the wheels spun smooth and true. The new bearings whispered instead of rattled, and the new shock gave just enough bounce to handle sidewalk cracks without jarring Lucy's back. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. A lot better. Angela asked if they were done. Maddie shrugged. One last thing. She rummaged through a battered tin box on a shelf above her workbench. Inside was an old roll of vinyl fabric she'd saved from a convertible top she'd replaced last summer. She measured, cut, and sewed a new seat cushion cover by hand, the stitches neat but strong. She stuffed it with foam scraps from an old motorcycle seat. When she was done, she fitted it to the chair and looked at Lucy expectantly. Lucy climbed back in, wiggling around to test the seat. Her face lit up. "It's soft, and it doesn't squeak," Maddie grinned. "Give it a spin." Lucy did, rolling small circles inside the garage, giggling every time she turned sharply, and the chair stayed solid beneath her. Angela's eyes shone with tears she tried to hide. Maddie packed up her tools and leaned against the workbench, watching Lucy zip around. For the first time in a long time, she felt like her dad would have been proud. She didn't charge Angela a dime. When asked why, she just shrugged and said, "Some fixes you don't put a price on," and deep down she meant it. The next morning, Maddie woke up to a soft knock on her garage door. She hadn't expected anyone so early, but when she rolled the door open, there stood Lucy and Angela again. The little girl's face was brighter than the morning sun behind her. Her new seat cushion still spotless, her wheels spinning true. Maddie greeted them with a sleepy grin, pushing stray hair under her cap. Angela handed her a small paper bag with fresh muffins from the diner down the street. It wasn't much, but to them it was everything. Lucy rolled into the garage like she owned the place. Maddie chuckled as the girl expertly maneuvered between tool benches and oil drums, her laugh echoing off the metal walls. It was contagious. Even Maddie, who usually hated mornings, found herself whistling as she wiped down her workbench. She didn't ask what brought them back so soon. She already knew. Sometimes when you fix something broken, people want to stick close to where they felt hope spark back to life. Angela explained they were on their way to Lucy's physical therapy appointment, but wanted to show Maddie how well the wheelchair was working. Maddie leaned over, inspecting the wheels like a proud parent. She tightened a bolt here and there, checked the brakes again, and gave Lucy a thumbs up. Lucy responded by spinning a tight circle, the chair gliding like new. Maddie's chest filled with quiet pride. As they were about to leave, Angela hesitated. She turned to Maddie and asked if she'd ever thought about fixing other things, not just cars and bikes. Maddie raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" she asked, half joking. Angela gestured at the wheelchair. "Like this. There are so many families with kids like Lucy. Not everyone can afford the fancy chairs. Maybe you could help them too." Maddie looked at the oil stains on her hands, then at the battered garage. It wasn't exactly a hospital lab, but maybe it didn't have to be. That idea stuck in Maddie's head long after the minivan rolled away down Main Street. She tried to push it aside as she dove back into work, fixing an old Chevy that needed a new transmission. But between gears and bolts, her mind kept drifting to Lucy's smile. She remembered her father's words about seeing possibilities in broken things. Maybe that didn't just mean cars. Maybe it meant people's dreams too. Word about what Maddie had done for Lucy spread faster than any gossip about bad brakes or late oil changes ever could. By the end of the week, 2 more families showed up at Maddie's door. One had a young boy whose crutches were too short and always pinched his sides. Another had an old pushchair that rattled worse than Lucy's ever did. Maddie didn't know exactly how to fix crutches or build braces from scratch, but she knew machines. She knew leverage and balance. She knew how to listen when something squeaked and how to quiet it. She started small, tightening screws, adding padding, welding tiny metal brackets to keep weak spots from bending too far. Some days she'd work on a broken lawnmower in the morning and fit new wheels to a battered walker by lunch. Parents began bringing her old parts and scrap they found in sheds or garages, rusty bike chains, loose bearings, broken strollers that still had good wheels. To Maddie, it was treasure. The old neighbors who'd once dropped by just to check if Maddie could fix their fender or patch a leaking radiator now stopped to watch her help these kids. They didn't always understand what she was doing, but they nodded and brought her spare parts in sandwiches and coffee. Sometimes they even left a $20 bill folded under a rag on her workbench. They said it was for her magic hands. Maddie just smiled and kept working. One chilly afternoon, Lucy's mom showed up again, this time with a man in a dark suit and wire-rimmed glasses. He introduced himself as Dr. Warren, a local pediatric specialist who'd heard about Maddie through a friend. He asked if she would be willing to show him what she'd done to Lucy's chair. Maddie shrugged and pulled the battered thing onto her bench again. She explained every bolt, every bearing, and how she'd repurposed an old mountain bike shock absorber to make the ride smoother. Dr. Warren listened intently, nodding, asking technical questions that Maddie answered with surprising confidence. He wasn't there to talk down to her or to lecture her about regulations. He was genuinely fascinated. He told her there were grants for people who designed affordable assistive devices. He talked about workshops at the local community college where she could learn to prototype parts with 3D printers. Maddie felt her heart pound at the idea. She'd never gone to college, never sat in a lab. Her classroom had been this drafty garage. Her teacher, her father's grease-covered hands. A week later, Dr. Warren returned with a small team from the local hospital. They wanted to see what else Maddie could do. She showed them sketches she'd made in the margins of old receipts, ideas for adjustable braces, a motorized push assist for chairs like Lucy's, and a set of sturdy crutches that grew with the child instead of needing to be replaced every few months. The doctors looked impressed. But what mattered most to Maddie was that Lucy was there too, scribbling her own ideas with colored pencils on the back of old invoices. That spring, Maddie's garage looked the same from the outside, rusty walls, squeaky door, but inside it buzzed with a new purpose. There was still an old pickup needing an oil change and a tractor that wouldn't start. But beside them stood wheelchairs with shiny new wheels, braces waiting for test fittings, and stacks of parts waiting to be transformed into something better. Neighborhood kids came by after school to help polish metal or sort bolts by size. Lucy was there almost every weekend, rolling around handing Maddie tools and ideas in equal measure. One evening, after everyone had left and the sun dipped low behind the faded Maddox Auto and Machine sign, Maddie sat alone on the cold concrete floor. She looked at her father's old photo on the wall, taped beside a rack of wrenches. She whispered a soft "Thanks, Dad" into the quiet garage. She knew he'd be proud that she didn't just fix engines anymore. She fixed something bigger, something doctors hadn't been able to fix with scalpels and charts. By the end of summer, a local news station came to do a story. Maddie hated cameras, but Lucy loved them, so she sat proudly on her smooth rolling chair, telling the reporter how Miss Maddie had made her feel brave and free. Angela stood to the side, wiping away tears she didn't even try to hide anymore. When the camera turned to Maddie, she just shrugged and said, "Sometimes you just have to listen to what's broken. If you listen close enough, you can always find a way to fix it." The segment aired on a Friday night. By Monday morning, Maddie's phone rang non-stop. And parents called from towns she'd never heard of, asking if she could help their kids too. Some offered to pay, some offered to bring old scrap parts in trade, and some just begged for a chance at hope. Maddie didn't have all the answers yet. She didn't have fancy tools or a big lab, but she had her father's garage, her own 2 hands, and a community that believed in her. So she rolled up her sleeves, flipped the open sign in the dusty window, and got back to work. And as long as kids like Lucy needed her, she knew she'd never stop listening for the quiet rattle that said, "This can be fixed."